Beneath the vast stretch of midnight sky, the city seemed to breathe slower, as if time itself had paused to listen to the soft hum of the wind brushing against the rooftops. Streetlights flickered like tired stars, painting golden halos on the empty road that led to the old riverside café, a place forgotten by the day but remembered by the night. It was here that she sat, alone, her fingers tracing lazy circles around the rim of a coffee cup that had long gone cold. Her name was Elara, quiet, poetic, and distant, much like the moon that watched over her from the gentle rhythm of the river's current mirrored the ache in her chest, the one she thought she had buried long ago. Across the street, shadows moved in fragments, until one took form, a silhouette she had known too well once upon a time. His name, whispered by memory, felt like a storm in her heart, Adrian. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since that night when silence had become their only language. Now, as he stepped closer, his face catching the silver glow of moonlight, Elara felt the weight of every unspoken word return like a tide. He looked older, not by years but by the heaviness behind his eyes. His hair was slightly longer, his jawline sharper, yet the softness, the one that had always made her trust him, still lingered in his gaze. Their eyes met, and in that fragile space between heartbeat and breath, the world seemed to vanish. The cafe clock ticked faintly, echoing the seconds that felt like lifetimes. Adrian hesitated, then walked forward, his steps careful, almost reverent, as though afraid that one wrong move might shatter the moment. "You still come here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the warmth of a memory. Elara smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering beneath the soft lamplight. "Some things don't change," she whispered, though her tone trembled. For a long moment, neither spoke again. The night wrapped around them, intimate and infinite, holding its breath for two hearts that had once known how to beat as one. And though the city slept, something within them stirred awake, a quiet, undeniable pull toward the love that had never really ended, only paused in the long silence between their last goodbye and this fragile reunion. Adrian sat across from her, the faint creak of the old wooden chair sounding like a sigh between them. For a while, neither knew where to begin. The air was thick with unsaid words, carrying the ghosts of promises once made under the same moonlight. Elara's eyes lingered on the river through the cafe's fogged window, its reflection rippled gently, as though the water itself remembered their story. "Do you ever think about that night?" Adrian asked finally, his voice careful, like stepping on thin ice. Elara's hand froze around her cup, her breath catching. That night. The memory bloomed in her mind, the rain, the trembling goodbye, the feeling of losing something sacred. "Every time it rains," she admitted softly, her eyes meeting his. A sad smile tugged at his lips. "I tried to forget," he said. "But forgetting you felt like forgetting how to breathe." His confession hung between them, fragile and raw. Outside, the world seemed to melt into the rhythm of the night, cars passing distantly, the murmur of wind in the trees, the faint hum of music from a nearby apartment window. Everything felt suspended, as if reality had bent itself just to let them speak. Again. Elara looked at him, and for the first time in years, she saw not the man who left, but the man who once stayed when the world was falling apart. "We were too young," she whispered. "Too scared to believe love could survive the storm." Adrian leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. "Maybe we weren't wrong," he said. "Maybe we just needed time to find the courage to return." Silence followed, heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that spoke of healing, of something broken finding its shape again. The moonlight spilled across the table, catching the edges of their faces, softening the distance between them. Elara felt the ache in her chest shift, no longer sharp, but tender, as if love was remembering how to breathe again. The night deepened, the stars scattering brighter across the velvet sky, and the cafe slowly emptied until they were the only ones left. The owner, an old man with kind eyes, nodded to them before quietly locking the door from inside, letting them linger in the soft hum of jazz that played faintly from the old record player. It was the same song that had once been their song, the melody that had played on their first night together years ago. Elara's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering in her gaze. "He still plays it," she murmured. Adrian smiled faintly. "Maybe he remembers." The music wrapped around them like memory itself, warm, slow, and bittersweet. Without thinking, Adrian extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said softly. She hesitated, eyes wide with the same uncertainty that once kept her from reaching back. But then, as the melody swelled, she placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, awakening something that had never died. They moved slowly, gently, as though the air between them was sacred. His hand rested at her waist, hers on his shoulder, and for a moment, everything felt like it used to, before time, before mistakes, before distance. The record crackled softly as it spun, their shadows swaying together in the candlelight. "I missed this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian leaned closer, his breath warm against her hair. "I missed you." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he caught it with his thumb, his touch trembling with emotion. Outside, the moon reflected on the river like a mirror to their hearts, fragile, luminous, and eternal. As the last note of the song faded, they didn't let go. The silence that followed was no longer hollow, it was alive with everything they hadn't said, with every heartbeat that had waited for this moment to return. When the music finally faded, the world seemed to still itself around them, as though even time refused to interrupt what was unfolding. Elara stood there, her hand still resting on Adrian's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her palms. It was a sound she had once known by memory, the same heartbeat that had been her calm in chaos, her anchor when the world felt too heavy. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her, trembling with something closer to longing than resentment. Adrian looked down at her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint, sorrowful smile. "I didn't come back," he said softly. "I never really left." The words struck her like a wave, gentle yet powerful, pulling her into everything she had tried to forget. Her walls, the ones built carefully over years of pretending, began to crack under the weight of the moment. "Adrian," she began, but her voice broke before she could finish. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers tracing the delicate curve of her jaw. "You don't have to say it," he murmured. "I know." For a heartbeat, the world fell silent, no music, no words, just the soft hum of their breathing entwined. The café lights flickered slightly, casting long, dappled shadows that danced across the floor like fragments of memory. Outside, the night carried on in its quiet rhythm, the river whispering against its banks, the moon standing watch like an old friend who had seen this story once before. Elara felt her pulse quicken as Adrian leaned closer, his breath brushing her lips. "Tell me," he whispered, "do you still believe in us?" The question lingered in the air, fragile and terrifying. She wanted to say yes, but fear still curled inside her, fear of hope, of loss, of beginning again. Her eyes shimmered as she met his gaze. "I never stopped," she admitted finally, her voice barely more than a breath. That was all it took. He closed the space between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt both like an ending and a rebirth. It wasn't rushed, nor desperate, it was slow, deliberate, filled with the weight of years lost and love rediscovered. The taste of it carried everything they had left unsaid, everything they had missed. When they finally parted, neither spoke. Words had become too small for what they felt. The night outside glowed a little brighter, the stars burning like witnesses to their fragile rediscovery. The kiss lingered in the air like a secret the night refused to let go. Outside, the river shimmered under the soft embrace of moonlight, its surface breaking into ripples that carried the reflection of two souls finding their way back to each other. For a long moment, they stayed like that, close enough to hear each other's heartbeat, yet still caught in the wonder of what they had rediscovered. Elara pulled back slightly, her eyes glistening with the quiet weight of emotion. "Do you think love really waits?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with sincerity. Adrian's gaze met hers, steady and full of warmth. "I think it doesn't wait," he said gently. "It just never leaves." She smiled then, a real one, fragile and luminous, the kind that could only be born from forgiveness. The clock behind them struck 2, its chime echoing through the still café, marking not the end of a night but the beginning of something new. The old man behind the counter glanced up, a knowing smile playing on his lips, as if he too could sense the quiet miracle unfolding. Adrian reached for Elara's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Come with me," he said, nodding toward the door. The streets outside glowed softly beneath the moon, empty but alive, as though waiting for their footsteps. They walked side by side through the sleeping city, passing the familiar corners that once held pieces of their story, the park bench where they first met, the bookstore they used to escape into, the narrow alley where rain had once written their goodbye. But now, everything looked different. The same streets, the same night, yet everything felt reborn beneath the light of their rediscovered love. When they reached the bridge overlooking the river, Elara stopped. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and Adrian gently tucked it behind her ear. "If this is a dream," she said softly, "don't wake me." Adrian smiled, his eyes reflecting the stars. "It isn't," he whispered. "It's what we were always meant to find again." The world around them faded into stillness, the sound of water, the whisper of wind, the pulse of the city far away. And under that silver moon, he kissed her once more, deeper this time, sealing the night with a promise not of forever, but of courage, to love again, to begin again, no matter how many midnights passed between them. When dawn finally began to spill across the horizon, soft and gold, the city awoke to a new day. But for Elara and Adrian, it wasn't just morning, it was rebirth. Somewhere between shadow and sunrise, love had found its way home.